Today I'm going to be talking about better communication specifically between frontline and management teams. And I'm going to introduce you to a model of working which I came across quite a long time ago now, probably over 10 years ago, when I'd not been working in the sector for very long, in the domestic violence sector. And at the time, I don't think I really appreciated it. It's been recently through my work with Labyrinth, conversations that I've had with Bernice, for example, about how we communicate both within our organisations, but also outside of our organisations as well. It's just really made me realise how potentially helpful this model can be. So I'm going to share it with you today and hope that that it's useful. So I work for Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid as the navigator for the Labyrinth Project in Birmingham. And I've worked in domestic violence for over 10 years, and I've worked in managerial roles, and I've worked in frontline positions as well. And I think this is why this is particularly important to me. This idea of improving communication within organisations, but also outside of that as well. So that's just to give you a little bit of background about myself, really. So I'll give you a little bit of background to the Labyrinth Project in Birmingham. So the aim of the project is to improve outcomes for women, and we have navigators in various locations throughout the UK. It's a national project. When I came into post, the first thing for me to do was to carry out a mapping exercise with a view to identifying gaps in services for women in Birmingham. That was carried out, and the findings from that mapping exercise, there were a few, but the two main ones were a lack of communication between agencies. So agencies were telling me that they felt very much like they were working in isolation, and they didn't really know what other services were out there. Now, this hadn't been helped by COVID for obvious reasons, but I think I do think it was something that had been going on pre-COVID as well. It wasn't necessarily a new thing, but it had been exacerbated by COVID. So that was what organisations were telling me. And another thing was a lack of training around domestic violence for organisations who weren't specialists, particularly smaller voluntary sector organisations, for a number of reasons. And part of that might be a budget. They might not have the training budget that bigger organisations would have. They might not have the resources and the time to commit staff to training. So that's something else that I'm working on at the moment as well. So my action plan, I've recently set up a new networking group called Working with Women in Brum. And the idea of that is to bring smaller voluntary sector organisations together to network, to share good practice, to look at how we can work together with the aim to improve outcomes for women. Now, the membership of that group isn't women-only services, isn't just women-only services. It's open to any service that has an interest in improving outcomes for women in particular. And it's not just domestic violence focused either. And I'm also offering domestic abuse training for voluntary sector organisations as well as part of my role. So that's just to let you know what I'm working on at the moment. Right, so I'm going to move on to this idea of effective communication. As I've said, what I'm talking about today can be used both within an organisation and also outside of that organisation as well, with partners that you're working with. So I want you to think a little bit about the benefits of effective communication. And I think these are probably quite obvious. I don't think I've come up with anything really that's going to surprise you, but I think we don't necessarily think about it very often. As I said, I was introduced to the model that I'm going to come on to talk about a number of years ago, and I haven't come across. I've worked in lots of different places, and I haven't come across it since. So I think it's something that we don't always devote the time and the resources to thinking about. So these are some of the things that I've come up with. So first of all, it can raise the morale of staff. Staff it can help them to feel listened to and to be a bigger part of the decision-making processes within their organisation. Hopefully it could lead to fewer issues within the organisation. Everything I talk about in this presentation, as I've said, could be within an organisation or outside of that. So just kind of keep that in mind. So hopefully it would lead to fewer issues, and where there are issues, they could be resolved more quickly. Clearer service boundaries, so staff have an awareness of what their roles are within their organisations, but also the boundaries of their services outside of their organisations, and the impact that that can have on when working with partner agencies and how the partner agencies view them. And this is something that I've come across quite often, actually, working in the women's sector, working with other organisations, is sometimes those boundaries get blurred. There can be misunderstandings about what service that organisation provides, and that can lead to things like inappropriate referrals from outside agencies, which can cause real problems. Hopefully happier staff, and more effective collaborative working as well, and that could be more noticeable within the organisation, better team working. And finally, it can help to manage positive working relationships, both internally and with external partners, which I've just kind of talked a little bit about already. So hopefully that makes sense. If we move on to the next slide, I'm thinking here in particular about benefits to the women's sector, which might be slightly different and a bit more kind of specialised than benefits in general. So by this, I'm thinking about shared experience among professionals, and that's both managerial staff and frontline staff of working in the sector. There are there are differences that we come across working in the women's sector, and I think, with better communication, we've got more opportunities to share those experiences. I'm thinking specifically about things like, again, how external partners might view our organisation. The idea that the women's sector does get challenged a fair amount, and there are in some areas, there are attempts to sort of try and shrink the women's sector a little bit, and bringing in sort of more generalised services and less specialised services. So if we can share our experiences as professionals experiencing that, I think that could potentially be really beneficial for the women's sector. Improved networking and joint working in the sector. I mentioned the networking group that I've recently set up, and the feedback I've had so far has been really positive. Just helping organisations to feel more joined up, that there are other organisations out there doing similar kinds of work, but that can help them to fill the gaps that they've got in their services and so on. It also strengthens the voice of the women's sector, which can be really useful when you come up against challenges like I've just mentioned. Also increase respect for the sector from outside agencies, and bringing women's experiences and voices into decision-making processes. Now there I'm thinking particularly about service users. If we can feed those voices up into the decision-making processes, where the managerial staff, the strategic staff are working, then that, in my opinion, that has to be a good thing. And I think it's something that a lot of organisations really want to do, but they find it difficult to do as well. So now I've called this model the bilateral communication model, which sounds really posh. I haven't Googled it. And it might be copyrighted by someone, so I hope this isn't going to get me into trouble. This is just a name that I have come up with, okay? And it's just it's obviously it's a model that works. The communication goes two ways. So okay. So this model, you have it consists of two fora. So the first forum is for frontline staff, and that is where they can share experiences and good practice. The second forum is for strategic and managerial staff who have responsibility for decision making. Okay, and that what this model does, you'll see from in the next slide, it brings these two fora together. Before I go on to the diagram, which is a bit crude, forgive me, but the timings of these meetings, these two fora, is very important. Okay, and they need to happen alternately, and you'll see why when I move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is your diagram of how the model works. So you'll have, so each fora meets alternately, as I've said, and then you'll have a gap. And the gap should be the same between each meeting. Now, in this diagram here, I've put 6 weeks. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks. It can be whatever you think is going to work best for your particular area of work, okay? So you'll have the frontline forum meeting, 6 weeks later management forum, 6 weeks later frontline, and so on. Okay. The characteristics of the fora. So, and these are really important for it to work. Okay. So the line of communication between the two fora needs to be formally established, and that can be through the group's agenda and also through the group's terms of reference. So it's really important before you get anyone signing up for these fora that they know them, and they know and they understand the model, okay, and they know where their contributions to these fora are going to be shared, and the reasons for sharing that, okay. And I think that's really important to get that understanding before you get people on board. Both groups must be formalised, so as I've said, with the terms of reference, with agenda, and they need to be minuted, and that's to make sure that whatever information is shared at that meeting, whatever discussions are had, there's an accurate record of that, because obviously for that to be shared with the other forum, that needs to be accurate, and we need to know what everyone has contributed. And they also need to be regularly held, which I've already said. Now, it's important to say that both groups might already exist wherever you're working, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And this is the thought process that I'm going through at the moment, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in my role with the Labyrinth Project. If you think this model could work for you and could be helpful, and it's not in place already, then have a think about what groups have you got already, because people are stretched. There's a commitment, there's a time and resource commitment, which again I'll go on to be a part of these groups. So my advice would be to have a look at what you've got already in place. Can some of that be adapted rather than just creating something new? Tap into what resources you've already got. Okay. If we think a little bit about the kind of items that might be on the agendas for these fora, I've come up with a few here, but the list is endless really. So for the frontline staff forum, they might be talking about current projects that each organisation has got going on. They might be talking about trends or issues in the sector or the geographical area that they're working in. They might be talking about referral mechanisms. And for the management or strategic staff forum, that there might be discussions around service delivery, funding opportunities, and also partnership working. So what's the bigger picture? Now, this is obviously for where you're using the model to work outside of your organisation, but if you're using it inside your organisation, the agenda items might be different, and it'll depend on the size of your organisation as well. If you're working in a small organisation, this might just be too much of a buy-in really. For the time that needs to be put into it, you might not feel it's necessary. So that's something else obviously to think about depending on where you're going to use this model. On this slide, we're thinking about examples of decision making or processes which can be assisted by the bilateral model. So what are the nuts and bolts that could actually come out of this? What could we actually use it to help us with? Again, these are just my ideas. There's lots of other things that you could come up with. So one of them might be fine-tuning policies or procedures, for example, referral processes. So this model could be particularly useful for a new organisation that's just started working in the area. They can use this model to pick up advice and ideas from you know, a really wide range of staff from lots of different organisations. It could give you a really big audience and help you sort of fine-tune those things on, you know, really quickly. It could also be used for engaging hard to reach groups, which can be tricky for voluntary sector organisations, women's organisations as well. So, you know, you can use the model to think about the demographics of the area. Is there a need for specialist support, more specialist support? You know, if so, can we feed that up to the strategic group and find some funding that we could apply for to address that? Another one might be setting up a survivors group, or, you know, any sort of service user group, basically. And also, I've already mentioned this, but examining the demographic of the area covered and forming a response to any particular needs or trends that you're seeing in the area that you're working in. So what might be the challenges in implementing this model? There's an obvious time commitment. So you need a nominated frontline worker to attend, and also ideally a nominated member of management to go. In my opinion, I think it's better to have nominated members of staff rather than kind of sharing it round, just to sort of give that sense of continuity, really, and to help with the networking aspect of the group, so that the people attending can kind of form that working relationship with each other. Obviously, there will be times when that person might not be able to go and they might need someone to step in on their behalf. But there's a big time commitment there. You know, does your organisation have that capacity? There's also a resources commitment. So as well as being, you know, a face on the screen, if it's being held virtually, or a body on a chair, if it's, you know, being held in the room, outside of that, there is a resources commitment. So there's a commitment for management to listen to what's being said within the frontline group, and also incorporate the information from that into their decision-making processes, and also for frontline staff to coordinate their input and their ideas. So although you've got a nominated frontline representative, that person needs information from their co-workers to feed into that group. It's not just meant to be one person's perspective on what's happening. And obviously that's going to take up, you know, time and resources. It might be that this model will bring up issues that hadn't been thought of before. So it could potentially be creating, you know, it could create extra work for people. And you know, I think you need to be mindful of that as well. The other thing to say is it could be more difficult for smaller organisations. You know, how can they feed into this model? If you have, you know, there's a group in my networking group at the moment, and they've got 2 members of staff, you know, literally 2 members of staff. So for them to be able to commit to a model like this might just be too much. So how can we make sure that they still have some kind of input? It might just be that they're given access to the minutes from the meetings, you know, and then maybe they can have an input in another way without having to be present at those meetings. It's, you know, this is just a model that I'm presenting, and it's really up to yourselves how you want to make it work. The impact of working to this model. So what can we get out of it? I've already talked a bit about the benefits of effective communication, but with this model in particular, what would we want to see come from it? And I think the voices of frontline staff being heard is a really important one, and that can be lacking in some organisations, particularly after COVID. I think, you know, that needs to be said as well. Strategic staff are kept in the loop regarding trends, developments and issues on the ground. Now, you might have team meetings within your organisations, which could potentially serve that purpose. But if you're looking at setting up a model which is bringing together outside organisations, you know, that's another element that you could potentially add to that. So you could be sharing the issues on the ground with organisations that you're working in partnership with, rather than just within your own organisation. Any potential changes or developments have a clear line of communication which can be utilised. So it's sort of, although there is, I've talked about the commitments that need to be given to this model, it can be potentially time saving as well in some aspects. So you're avoiding conversations in other fora about, you know, how can I communicate this to someone, how can I raise this point with someone, because there's already a process in place for that to happen, so people feel more confident about things being heard. And swift and efficient consultation with key players, both within and outside of the sector. So this idea of kind of speeding up consultation or discussions around issues in particular that might be going on, you know, that can happen more quickly because the people involved in the model are already aware of those things. It's not new to them. And lastly, this is just going back to Labyrinth in Birmingham going forward. So as I said, this model is something that I'm going to be looking at again. You know, is it something that we could, we've got there are a lot of strategic meetings in Birmingham, but we haven't as such got this line of communication between strategic level and frontline work. So it is something that I'm really keen to set up. So as I've said, we've already got the Working with Women in Brum meetings, which is a frontline workers forum. We are effective at networking, sharing good practice and collaborative projects, but we are lacking this line of communication into management and strategic fora to influence decision making. So I need to really think about how to do that, and as I've said before, not reinventing the wheel, you know, looking at what we've got already, the people that we've got on board already, and just trying to build on that. So I'm sort of back, you know, at the other end of that now, and thinking about, okay, well, that model worked really well in the past, you know, how can we sort of get something like that going again? Okay, and lastly, thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was helpful, and we're going to move over now to any questions or thoughts for discussion. Okay, and I'll hand back to Bernice, and I'll stop sharing. There you go.
Thanks so much, Sophie. I think that's super interesting, and you know, having worked in a frontline team before, I think one of the main issues is not always feeling like there is a place to influence, you know, on a strategic level and meet other staff members from other organizations. So I think there's just, you know, so much potential there. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or comments. I'm curious if you've ever come across something similar before, or if it seems like something that could be incorporated into your area of work. I feel like Katie wants to speak.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you, Sophie. I think, yeah, I've contacted work for Nottingham Women's Centre, and we have a women's organisational network referred to as One Meetings. And I think that kind of concept could apply to kind of those meetings, because they've just set up that kind of is for frontline workers at the moment, and has representatives from a lot of different local women's groups, again, for ones not exclusively women only services, but those that are kind of women's considerations and responsiveness at the front of their services. But they've recently looked to set up one that's for kind of the management, like the strategic side. So maybe that's a good way of the two kind of networks interconnecting and sharing information. And I think, yeah, that's definitely something that I'm going to share with the team, because that's kind of up and running at the moment. But I agree, I think there's a lot of silo working and a lot of repetition and duplication and yeah, mapping. What really struck a chord was when you said about the clearer service boundaries. I'm finding that a lot, that people don't, we share our building with a few other women's sectors, and I think there's a misconception of the work that we can do and the limitation to that. So I kind of do doing professional welcome meetings to that end, to just try and kind of offer clarity on the limitation of what we can and can't offer, and who can in lieu of us. And that's been really helpful, just kind of giving an up-to-date kind of understanding to other groups. But I'm just really keen for, I'm involved in a project to mapping services, and I just, yeah, it drives me crazy. There's so much, I just feel a lot of pressure for knowing quite a lot of information about like the local services, but the project I'm working on is only a short period of time and limited funding, and I just want there to be a legacy to the work that we've done. And also I'm just consistently hearing that there's lots of mapping that's been done but then not been sustained or maintained, and in Nottingham we do have some public domains that do kind of try and centralise that information, but they're great, but even when you're looking for information, it's difficult to mine, and there needs to be like a focus on the women's sector within that. So I'm hoping that some of the resources we've created can become part of the resources and the buying for the women's organisation network, so members can access something kind of maybe on SharePoint and be able to kind of post and update in the interim, because at the moment they're quarterly meetings and that's quite a long time to go without checking in. And again, the agenda is always rammed with so many speakers, and it's just difficult to kind of be productive, I guess, when there's so many things that we're trying to do in one space. But like you say, people are time poor, and it's difficult to we're just looking to have that opportunity to all get together. But you're right, it's about trying to make that most effective in that communication and those things. And yeah, but there's some of my thoughts. I'm just kind of rambling, but thank you very much.
No, you're welcome, Katie. And I think you've raised two really important points there, like one about the need for mapping, which potentially could be reduced if we're all communicating with each other more. We might not need to carry out these mapping exercises quite so much if we are on top of issues and we've got a better grasp on what everyone's doing. But also, and I did mention it in the presentation, but I feel like I didn't quite do it justice, and you've picked up on it there about it could potentially be a real time saver. There is a requirement for organisations to put in the time to be part of it, but actually in the long run, once it's up and running and everyone is on board and they know how it works and they know what time they need to turn up, and they put it in their diary on repeat, it could actually really be a really good time saver, couldn't it? Going forward. So, and I think that that's something, if you are thinking about setting up something like this, that could be a real pull when you're kind of trying to encourage other people to get on board with it. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Great, thank you, Katie. I don't know if anyone else has a question or a comment about this model.
Is there a way to know which groups are actually going to be using it as an outside organisation interacting with lots of very different people at different stages of let's say the transition programme of women coming in into the Solis space? It would be fantastic to know, well, great, this is how you want to work, so we'll work alongside that. But I don't actually know if there's like a code that says, yeah, we're working to this or something. I mean, is it already in Solis? Is it what you're hoping to do, for example, or Sophie? Is it how far is it in terms of onboarding?
Well, I can't speak for Solis, Linda, but in Birmingham, it's not happening formally, let's say. I mean, I think organisations are talking to each other, but it's not happening formally in the model I've presented. And I think that's a good question. You know, if you're coming into somewhere new, which I've done with Labyrinth, I've never worked in Birmingham before, it can be quite difficult to try and find out who's doing what and to try and become a part of that. And it sounds, Linda, like you're working on a really kind of spread out, that's the sense that I'm getting, that, you know, you've got organisations coming from a large area and of all different sizes, and is that, which, you know, that could potentially make it even more complex. So yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to identify is the shared aim. You know, all the professionals around the table in these fora have got to have a shared aim. So that might be, you know, they're all working in domestic violence, or, you know, I don't know what it could be. But if you're working with a mixture of organisations who are providing different services and you know, to different groups of people, that's tricky. Sorry, Linda, I don't think that's very helpful, is it?
Okay.
You might find yourself tapping into several of them. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I don't. But Bernice, you might know more about what's happening with Solace specifically.
Yeah, just to answer your question, Linda, we don't have this model at Solace. I definitely think it's something we should think about, because we definitely have. I can't speak for myself, but I know that our senior managers and the people who Sophie described as, you know, the people who make the decisions, they, you know, everyone attends lots and lots of forums and meetings, and there are definitely a lot of meetings on the borough level as well, where service managers would go and attend. I don't know that we have this this type of communication that goes, in addition to sort of going horizontal, kind of goes you know, into the organization and deals with the different tiers that organizations are operating. So to make it short, I don't think we have something like this in place, but it would, to me, it definitely seems like something that would be beneficial. So if we don't have any questions at the moment, I will share the presentation if that's okay with everyone. And then, of course, if you have any questions, or you think, you know, that this might be something that you would like to try, or have some ideas and want to kind of keep thinking about it, I'm more than happy to connect you with Sophie, and I'm sure she'll be happy to just like bounce ideas with you and think together about how to put some of these things in place. If that's it for today, sorry,
Bernice. Yeah, just to say, you know, I'm not a communications expert or anything like this. This is, you know, I'm a frontline worker, you know, working in a service, but you know, this is just something that I've kind of developed an interest in, really, and hope and wanted to share. So I might not be able to answer your questions, but yeah, I'm more than happy for you to get in touch. And, you know, like I said, it's something that I'm going to be trying to do here. So, you know, if anyone's got any brilliant ideas, or you come across anything that you know I haven't thought of, then please, you know, share it. Thank you. Thanks, Bernice.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I actually think that, you know, this experience coming from frontline practice is really valuable, because it's where you kind of really see what might not be working and what is working. So this is, you know, it's a wonderful space to share that. Thank you so much, Sophie. I'll say thank you to everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your afternoon. We might.
Can I just ask? Can I ask a question? What's for on here? Sorry to interrupt you. Now we're just about to go off there. Sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
So I sit on and co-chair the Haringey Council's voluntary groups, women's groups. So it's like a network of community groups, and they're very specialist. And the issue of domestic violence, domestic abuse in very, very sort of specific areas comes up on a regular basis. So that's one. I'm also the women's officer for Australia Green. I'm also chair for Haringey. So I do a lot of work in the borough. And I'm just wondering about this broader picture in terms of networking and communication. We're so limited on resources. There is duplication of effort. You know, is there like for small organizations like me that that are well connected in a broader scale, but is there something where we can actually make better use of our own limited resources to actually better engage with the system that is us working in this space, that anyone's aware of?
It's a really good question, Linda. I think you're part of the Haringey Women's Network, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think that would usually be, the first place to start. I think it's similar to what Sophie said, when that thing is already in place, maybe it's a matter of looking at how we include more people in that and how to make that a bit more maybe effective or basically to answer better to the needs of the people who are using it. I don't know if Ali or Sophie have other thoughts on this, but I did know that Haringey is actually a borough where there's so much going on, and yes, sometimes it's about connecting all those different pieces of work together, and just making sure that everyone is speaking to each other. And maybe it's a matter of putting things more in place, as in there are networks and there are meetings, but they're not necessarily on a regular basis. It sometimes can be a bit, sometimes people come to this meeting or they don't come to another, and there's some of that consistency and formalization of the process that could be put in place, and that might, help everyone operate around that a little bit better. It's just.
Do you have a voluntary sector council type organisation, Linda, in Haringey?
Yeah, that's the one we're referring to. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's that whole thing of like, where are we duplicating effort?
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky. Yeah, okay. It's tricky. I don't think there's a perfect solution, really. Because even like I said, I've worked with this model that I've talked about today in the past, and even then, things weren't perfect. I mean, there were still times when organisations would misunderstand certain aspects of the work that was being. It's tricky. Unless you're all sat together day in, day out. There are going to be times when that communication gets slightly lost or things get a little bit misunderstood. So it's not perfect, and I think I don't think the funding situation helps in the women's sector either, does it? You get these short-term projects being set up, and then by the time people find out about them and tap into them, that they're finished, and you've got to wait for something else to hopefully come along and fill that gap. So that makes it really tricky as well. It's unusual to have long-standing services, isn't it, sometimes? So and then you've got to go, you've got to do it all again, promoting, introducing and promoting a new service and making everyone aware of that. So it's a constant.
Just to add to that, Sophie, in our last session last week, we had Emma, who's our grants officer, and she touched on this a little bit of how this kind of joint working can be baked into the process at the funding stage. So even before the project is alive, it's already there in place, and in that kind of working with funders or with funding groups for them to also understand and be able to work with us on facilitating more of this joint working and more space for it in the sector. So that is also something that we've been at least trying to raise more of a conversation around.
And I think that's where the time saving factor can come in again, isn't it? If everyone's aware that this project is being funded, it's coming to fruition, everyone knows about it before it starts. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We will put up some information about any future sessions. It might be a bit later in the summer, or it might be in the fall. We're not quite sure yet, but I just want to thank everyone who's tuned in. It's been lovely to meet all of you and just kind of share expertise and hear how different people do their work, and all the great things that they're doing that we can learn from and share. Thank you very much.